Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of the Wall of Champions, an F1 podcast. And we're a week late and $1 short, but we're just going to crack straight into it because I'm getting ready to head to Texas tomorrow for totally things that definitely aren't F1 related. Joining me in the garage tonight, we have Greg. Good evening, Greg.
Good evening.
And we have Luce. Hey, Luce.
Howdy.
You didn't do that with the correct Texan accent. I award you no points. May God have mercy on your soul.
He was kneeling, though.
He was kneeling for the flag.
Yeah, I did hurt my knee.
Wow, that just popped an ACL just right there.
Yes.
All right, let's just crack straight into it. It's, well, the championship's over, isn't it? We probably don't have much to talk about.
Yeah, it's done. Thanks for joining us, and I will catch you for Melbourne next year. Or maybe for pre-season, I don't know yet.
Back when competition is maybe hopefully resumed. It was the Japanese Grand Prix was a kick in the teeth for the championship, in all honesty. Singapore was one thing where we have, the race decided at turn one due to an accident, but for Sebastian to lose a significant amount of points due to a spark plug failure before the race even starts, it's what can you do? And then adding that to the Singapore gearbox problems. And Greg, does it just feel that the curse of Ferrari never winning a championship is just haunting Seb, isn't it?
I don't know if it's haunting Seb. He's only really had one proper crack at it so far. But I don't know what else there is you can say about it, really. Just the whole way I headed home from your place, speaking to my wife, all I could say was, oh, well, so...
2018 is going to be a thing.
Yeah, there's always next year.
And Luce, I know you've already given up hope on this championship, and you're probably doing a Garth Tander and focused on 2021, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. Let's just focus on 2019, and hopefully we get a good result.
New engines, big rule changes,
Oh, wait, sorry, that's what, 2021?
Yeah,
okay. Hopefully by then Mercedes has had enough and they've packed up and we've got a sport again.
All right, well, let's just have a look at what happened in Japan. And, we went there and there was this toing and froing about, who was going to be stronger. Was it going to be Ferrari? Was it going to be Mercedes? And in qualifying, it was very much Mercedes and Team LH, hashtag whatever, number 44 blessed. 3/10 faster than everybody else again in qualifying, and for nothing else, Hamilton will likely go on to win this championship now. But he's one lap form since the summer break has just been unbelievable. It's just to think of the run that he's on at the moment and how pedestrian he's made Bottas look since the summer break. It's just he's taken it to another level, surely, Greg, and. Winning the championship this year, he's going to have earned it, even taking into account Sebastian Vettel's problems.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's been on fire. I think his form in general has been really, really good. It would seem, going back to the last time we were talking about it, but I think Bottas is probably off form as well. But all credit to Hamilton. He's been really, really good. And as far as the balance of power is concerned, it was really interesting to hear what we heard from Christian Horner. I'm sure you're going to talk about it in terms of track temperature and how the form sort of changed from Sepang to Suzuka. I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. So It just goes to show how tight it is still.
Yeah, and is Lewis Hamilton driving the best you've ever seen him drive?
Yes. I think. Give that a bit of thought, which is why there was a bit of a pause. And
It's why I asked the question, because I think he's driving the best I've ever seen him drive.
Yeah, obviously you go back to his championship year, his first championship anyway, and well, he lucked into that. Nobody wanted to win the championship that year. Arguably his first year was better, and then you go to his other Well, obviously the other McLaren years after that weren't so great, but then you go obviously to his couple of championships that he won in 14 and 15, and there was moments where he was untouchable, but there was still he made mistakes and was a little inconsistent. While certainly the second half of this year he's been well, his qualifying's been insane, and then his race pace and his concentration has been better than it's ever been. So he's at the top of his game at the moment.
And conversely, Valtteri Bottas, how would you rate his performances in recent history?
There's a half full wheelie bin out front, and
I think I know where this is going.
That's probably pretty comparable to how he's been driving. He's not he's not really
I think it's a bit harsh. Average is probably the way I'd describe it.
Considering where he was at the start of the year, I know you guys will probably bring up maybe that car's not as easy to drive as what we think it is, but at the start of the year, you know, he was up there and, you know, looking to beat the Ferraris and the Red Bulls, and he, you know, there's a few rounds where he beat Hamilton legitimately. And since the summer break or mid-season, he's been just... It's like they've replaced him with a ghost or garbage bag or something. I don't know. He's just not shown up.
He's like a floating plastic bag in the wind. We've had Simus join the chat and say hello. Hello, Simus. Welcome. So it is interesting because at the start of the season he was far more competitive. Like, he obviously won in Russia and he looked very, very strong. But since the summer break, he's looked Kimi-esque. Like it's actually a good competition now to say that perhaps Kimi's been closer to Seb since the summer break than what Bottas has been to Hamilton. How would you gauge that, Lewis?
I'd give even Kimi Räikkönen the edge. Obviously, people probably say because I'm a Kimi Räikkönen fan that, you know, there's being a little bit biased. But I think when I try and give it a proper thought, Bottas hasn't looked anywhere near Hamilton. While there's been times where Räikkönen's been right with Vettel. Yeah.
All right. And how would you gauge that, Greg? Taking into account, of course, the Kimi, whilst Bottas was sort of 3.5 tenths off Hamilton in qualifying, Kimi himself was 7 tenths off Sebastian. Sebastian's best lap in Q3. But in terms of performances, how do you, if you were talking about the championship between the two number twos, it certainly seems like it's been a far closer competition since the summer break.
Yeah, I suppose. I haven't been paying too much attention to Bottas. He's been pretty anonymous, to be honest, but so's Kimi, in my view. And I'm only thinking back to Suzuka, but Bottas got on the podium, did he not? I think. Was it Bottas? I forget now. Pretty sure Bottas beat Kimi.
Yes, he did, yeah.
Oh no, he didn't get on the podium, did he? It was the two Red Bull drivers. But anyway, he still beat him.
Well, Raikkonen started at the back.
Did he?
Oh, yeah, but the last time he done that at Suzuka, he won a race in
so what's going on?
circumstances.
A bit of a difference. Giancarlo Fisichella wasn't leading the race.
Mate, controversial circumstances.
Then I take back the analysis from Suzuka. But in any case, Kimi's never fast enough when it counts, so I just put them in the same bucket, really. I don't really compare them that closely, to be honest. They've both been re-signed for one more year. I don't know if they're both...
Kimi's got 4 more years, mate.
If they're lucky, they'll both get another one. So
yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I must say that I've been disappointed with Bottas in the second part of the year. I mean, Kimi's been doing exactly what I think we all expected him to do. But Bottas showed a lot of potential at the start of the year, and for whatever reason, that car and the setup or whatever has just moved away from him after the summer break. I don't know. I don't believe too much in the psychology of these things that he's feeling psychologically under pressure or anything. I mean, his downward turn has come after he signed his contract for renewal for next year. So yeah. You could argue that maybe it's a hunger related thing, but I think it really must come down to a change in the way they're setting up the car, a change in the way the car is using the tires. And it's just not working for him. He can't extract the lap time out of it that Hamilton can, and it's not only over one lap; it's over an entire race distance. Yeah. So
I mean, I think we're all in agreement that Hamilton is probably in the best form of his career.
Yeah, I think so.
So, that says something. But I mean, Rosberg usually ran him a lot closer than Bottas is right now. So. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is, but he needs to get on top of it, ideally by the end of the season.
Well, I want to move. I want to move off Ferrari and Mercedes. There is something I want to come back to with Ferrari later on. I want to pose a question to you guys, but we'll have a look a little bit further down. During the lead up to qualifying, we saw Verstappen was pretty comfortably faster than Ricardo. Ricardo finds a magic lap in Q3 again, and out qualifies Max. So, but the performance between the two Red Bulls has been interesting of late, because the last few races Verstappen hasn't been having mechanical problems, and I won't say he's making Ricardo look a little bit pedestrian in those races, but Daniel looks like he's struggling for pace wise a little bit. I mean, obviously he lost time at at Sepang and Suzuka behind Bottas because he lost positions off the start. But are you starting to worry for Daniel Ricciardo, Greg, in terms of his battle with Max Verstappen?
I'm not massively worried, because I think it's more or less a foregone conclusion that they're not in the championship. It's been clear for a long time. But
for sure.
I mean, it is an ongoing battle, but there'll be ups and downs for both of them. And I think Ricciardo's shown enough in the last few races that he can still beat him every now and then, which is what happened in Suzuka. So it's just so close between the two of them, I think. But yeah, at times Max has looked a lot better, especially in the I wouldn't say especially in the rain, but yeah, Max is the scary thing about Max is that he's just getting started. So
yeah, yep,
yeah, we'll see what happens.
And Luis, how have you seen the battle between Verstappen and Ricciardo at Suzuka? And obviously they were both fighting for podium at Sepang as well.
Well, obviously Greg sort of touched on this. It is starting, for me anyway, maybe for Ricciardo to look a little ominous at which way the team's sort of heading. Obviously Max has had a lot of bad luck, and he's finally had a couple rounds where he's not had any bad luck, and he's won a race and finished second on outright speed. And Daniel's sort of in both of them. He's not quite been there. Obviously, he did get held up in the initial stages of Malaysia and stuff, but it's sort of been brewing. Obviously Daniel's been out qualified quite a bit to Max this year, which has sort of been ignored or just missed by people, obviously, with Verstappen retiring everywhere. So, and we've also heard that Ricciardo isn't exactly secure at Red Bull. We've heard, and obviously there's rumours about with saying that Red Bull are almost willing to let him go, so to speak, and they've almost given the keys to Verstappen. So I think the last few rounds are going to be sort of key into how that team shapes going forward.
Yeah. Okay. We'll move on from that. Obviously in qualifying, Kimi disappointing P6 down third row, out qualified by both the Red Bulls. The Force India's had a good qualifying performance at Suzuka with 7th and 8th. Ocon continuing to just press his case against Perez in terms of overall pace and the one lap speed. Obviously he was unlucky at Sepang, where he got his ears boxed a little bit. And then we had Felipe Massa snuck into the 10. It's been better for Williams in the last two races, hasn't it? Is it they're finally on top of their issues, do you think, or is it just track suitability has come back to them loose?
Could be a bit of track, obviously suiting their car a little bit better, but you could also say maybe other teams sort of had just off weekends, so to speak. Obviously, you do need a bit of power around Suzuka. I know people think, we've just got a lot of corners, but a lot of those corners are high speed, so you do need power. And obviously there's between Spoon and obviously 130R, that's a straight, and then even leading up the Spoon, coming out of the hairpin, you need power. Coming out of the Degners, you need power, and the main straight, you need power. So could say maybe that the track suited their car, but then we did see Stroll. He didn't exactly go as well as what he has been the last few rounds. So maybe it was just a good round from Massa, perhaps.
Yeah, and Greg, talking of power, because we know they got a lot of it, the McLarens 10th and 11th, and bit of controversy there with Fernando getting into P10 and knocking Van Dorn out, despite the fact that Fernando had, I think, from memory, a 1.2 million place grid penalty. So it seems like McLaren missed a trick there, didn't they? Or did they play it perfectly, considering they gave Van Dorn free choice of tyres, even though he eventually started in the 10?
Yeah, I think it's not that big a deal, to be honest. I think they would have been perfectly happy for Van Dorn to start P11. They wouldn't have been able to go much further, I don't think, into the top 10. So I don't see any major issues in giving Van Dorn that strategy option. So, yeah, it is a bit weird that Alonso did qualify that, to that all the way into the second qualifying session. I know it is technically their home race, inverted commas, but it was a little weird. But at the same time, I don't think it was didn't have any major implications.
Well, it worked out for Van Dorn on Sunday, so
That's right.
We'll get to that shortly. But Renault fell off the pace a little bit at Suzuka. It's probably an indication of where their car is suffering. Same with Haas. Toro Rosso were nowhere with Pierre Gasly making his he's not his debut, his second race. He debuted at Sepang, and he didn't even make it out of Q1. And then obviously the Sauber's buried at the back, not really going anywhere. So moving to Sunday, what we saw off the start was obviously a magnificent jump from Verstappen, past a slow starting Ricciardo, and then obviously he passed Sebastian a couple of laps in, with Sebastian's very slow car missing a spark plug. And well, it was a pretty tight battle between Hamilton and Verstappen in the end. Probably compromised by traffic in the back end of the race, Greg, if memory serves.
Yeah, the traffic was a little bit ordinary.
Felipe Massa in particular.
Felipe and Fernando.
Yeah.
Fernando was the one who ended up getting the reprimand, did he not? So it was a little bit, just a little bit questionable. But yeah, I mean, Hamilton, I think, probably did have him under control. It would have been really difficult, I think, for Max to pull a pass on Hamilton. It's not as easy to pass at Suzuka as it is at Sepang. And I think Hamilton, at this point, the pressure's sort of coming off him a bit in terms of the points gap to Seb. So I think he would have been a lot more keen to hold on for the win, So I don't think anything was compromised too much, but it was a bit of poor form, to be honest, especially from a world champion.
Yeah, I thought so too. And actually, just one thing I forgot before I moved, but I skipped straight over it in my notes, is that Lewis Hamilton, by taking pole at Suzuka, now holds at least one position at every track on the calendar. That's a pretty amazing kind of record, and hats off to him for that, because that's I don't even know if Michael ever held that record, did he?
Probably not, just off hard to say, but probably not, no.
So, yeah, hats off to him. In fact, the last one who probably did that, dare I say it, was probably Ayrton Senna.
Every chance. If anyone actually has done it.
Yeah. So that's that'd be a good one to go back in history books and have a look. I haven't heard anyone ask that yet. But we saw that the Red Bulls managed to get themselves second and third. Bottas fourth. The Red Bull's an interesting car at the moment, isn't it? Because in a race trim, it kind of looks like the best car out there. But it's difficult to say because the Ferraris haven't been in a race really for the last three races. So it's really difficult to actually work out where it is Red Bull actually are. Is Red Bull's performance being flattered by the fact that Ferrari's been out of the race for the last couple of races, or are they legitimately got claims to having the best race car on the grid now, Luce?
It's a tough one. I think obviously, if you can't compare them to Ferrari, obviously with their troubles that they've had, I think you obviously look at Mercedes, and they've been competitive with Mercedes, and obviously they've been the benchmark for, well, not only much this year, but obviously, the previous years. And Red Bull have been, especially in the last year, it's right there with them. So I think it's safe to say that if they're not currently the second best car in the field, they're certainly, I reckon, 2B to Ferrari. Like they are right there. And I think obviously if they can get a bit of extra power next year and they can build on the car they have now for next year, we could see, a three, Verstappen, Ricciardo, Vettel, and Hamilton duking it out next year.
Yeah. And if you look at the top 5 finishes from Suzuka, so you had Hamilton, Verstappen, Ricciardo, Bottas, Raikkonen, even Ocon and Perez, they pretty much, the only thing that really had changed from qualifying was the fact that Verstappen managed to jump Ricciardo and Vettel wasn't in the race, and Bottas lost position to both Red Bulls. So there wasn't, for a track that is usually pretty good for overtaking at Suzuka, it kind of seemed a little bit not overtaking. I don't know how to put that better.
It's static.
Yeah, it was very static, particularly at the front of the field. And which I find unusual. Do you think, Greg, that's a function of the cars that we've got this year, that they've got a bigger drag profile because they're wider, and that at a track like Suzuka, particularly through the first sector, that it did actually show one of the weaknesses of the cars this year, which is the inability to follow another car at close proximity. And we hadn't really seen that for a lot of the years, at least for the last few months. And we've got to Suzuka, a very, very aero-sensitive track, particularly, like I said, the first sector. And we saw what was really a very static race.
Personally, I don't think so. I think some of the races we've seen, I can't really remember. I can barely remember what happened in the last race. Never mind the last 6 years we've been at Suzuka. But say races like 2011 and whatnot, I think a lot of the races at Suzuka come down to tyre strategy, and I think less so the downforce and drag and whatnot of these cars. The actual lack of tyre strategy that we have this year is probably what contributed to the static race we saw. Like, there wasn't really much going on in terms of undercutting or someone on really worn out tyres fighting on someone else with brand new tyres. So, I mean, hopefully next year, if they do soften the compounds, we'll see less races like that, because they were one-stop races, weren't they? It was another one-stop race. So, I mean, I think you do need to add in at least another pit stop worth of tyre wear in there to see the kind of races that we want to see. But yeah, I mean, it could be an element of the dirty air, that aspect of it, but I don't know. It just didn't seem to. I don't think that was the main thing that caused the pretty static race that we saw.
Yep, and Luce, I wanted to ask you. We saw midway through the race that Sergio Perez was on the radio complaining to the team about Esteban Ocon being in front of him, even though he was a good half a minute behind Kimi Raikkonen, who was in P5, and making noises about Ocon letting him pass, or at least being able to race him. Has Sergio Perez got a very, very short memory, or is he just testing how much rope he's got at Force India, Luce?
With Sergio, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. He must be just testing the team and seeing if he can, obviously, because he's in front of Ocon in the standings. Maybe, obviously he feels entitled. Maybe, as he's seen when he's been at other teams, maybe he just felt entitled that, okay, I'm slightly faster, even though the next car down the road's 30 seconds and he's got no chance of catching. But yeah, I think that's what. To me, I think it's sort of, he just comes off just a little bit entitled, thinking faster, and he deserves to be there when obviously you've got to pass teammate.
Yep. Do you have any opinion on that, Greg, in terms of the battle for Force India?
I don't know. I think he was maybe just being, heavy-handed or heavy. I don't know what the word is. It basically just he's just being stubborn for the sake of being a stubborn racing driver. He's probably just trying to maintain the impression of being a tough racing driver, I guess. Trying to seem like he has that strong personality, I guess. But yeah, I didn't understand the point of it at all. Maybe he didn't know the gap to Raikkonen up the road. Maybe it seems unlikely, but. Yeah, like Lewis said, it's probably best to say he was testing the team to see how much he could get out of them.
It is pretty funny when you think back to Montreal and his reaction to being perhaps ask the question as to whether he could let Esteban through and his reaction to that versus what we saw from him at Suzuka. It's
Oh, look, hypocrisy is a hallmark of all the all the racing drivers, I guess. You know, they've all got massive egos. They're all looking out for themselves.
that's
He's
true.
just following through on that.
What we also saw was a good race for the Hasses. They got double points finish in 8th and 9th, which when you looked at Grosjean in qualifying, you wouldn't have thought that was actually something that was going to happen after he buried it 3 wheels deep into the barrier in the first sector. It was a good race. It was a good race for the Hasses, Luce. But how do you feel about their performance this year? In terms of, they came onto the scene. They've got more points this year, I think, than they got last year. But for me, it doesn't feel like they've progressed. Is it just me, or is that true?
I feel the same way. I don't think they've gone forward. That's for sure. Obviously, they might have more points, but obviously, there's been this year compared to the last couple of years. There's been more mixed up rounds where they've been able to get bigger points hauls. But certainly for a lot of the year, they've felt, to me anyway, or it seemed to be like they've been way off the pace compared to like last year, where they'd be pushing decent spots in qualifying and looking all right. And then this year, there's been races and qualifying sessions where they're struggling to even beat the Sauers, which is not something we really saw of them last year. So, yeah, they're in a interesting spot. It's similar to, I guess, how Stewart went back in '98. They had '97 where they had a couple of good results, and then in '98 they sort of struggled a bit. So maybe it's just a similar thing.
Yeah, and what about you, Greg? Opinion on Haas's season so far? As they head into their home Grand Prix, I might add.
It's been pretty disappointing, but it was a real turn of form, wasn't it, at Suzuka?
Well, they struggled in qualifying, but turned it on in a race. So.
Yeah, they did. So they've been a bit disappointing, I suppose. But
and what do you make? What do you make of the driver lineup with Magnussen and Grosjean in there?
I don't know. It seems a bit average, to be honest. But then at this stage, they are a bit of a average team, kind of building. It feels a lot like Red Bull's lineup when they first came into Formula One.
Decent. With DC and Christian Klein and Vincenzo.
Yeah, just like a sort of a. I sort of picture Grosjean now as a bit of a journeyman driver. Not that I'm sure he wouldn't want that title, but that's kind of what I think. And they've got their hothead kind of young driver. Not that Magnussen's probably that much younger than Grosjean, but he certainly hasn't been in the sport as long. So I guess he's their kind of young gun. But it could be better. But then the car could be better as well. They're a team building, so they can have superstars from the get go.
Yep. All right then.
But they could have drivers that could potentially be superstars, but from what I've heard recently, they don't want to take them.
That's true. So Ferrari did put the pressure on him to run Charles Leclerc next year, and apparently Haas have declined.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Robert Kubica.
No, Kubica. Hopefully Kubica is destined for Williams.
No, that'll be Paul di Resta.
Paul di Resta. So, speaking of Williams, Felipe Massa scrubbed up the last point. He was in a battle with Fernando at the end. Would have been great to see Alo get a point. I still can't believe we've got to sit here and talk about Fernando Alonso maybe getting a point. Jolyon Palmer somehow managed to beat his teammate, despite the fact that Hulkenberg was beating him pretty comfortably up until he DNF'd, and I think he was even ahead of him, even though he'd made an extra pit stop or something like that, which is just Palmer things. Which we'll get to shortly, because just Palmer things is not racing in Austin. So Pierre Gasly would finish 13th. Stoffel Vandoorne dropped the 14th. Pascal Wehrlein finished 15th. And DNFs from Stroll, Hulkenberg, Ericsson, Carlos Sainz, and tragically for the championship, Sebastian Vettel. All right, so we will talk about the Renault Toro Rosso situation now, because it was a shock announcement on Saturday after qualifying that Suzuka would actually be Jolyon Palmer's last race for Renault, and that Carlos Sainz will be in the car at Austin in Texas. And I think that's there must have been some backroom dealing going on to get Sainz into that car, and where I'm just curious as to where the pressure was coming from. How did you read that situation, Lewis? And what do you think? What do you think it was in the end that pushed Palmer? Palmer seemed adamant he wanted to see out the season, and then all of a sudden capitulated and parted like the Red Sea for Moses to get out of that car for Carlos in America.
I honestly haven't read much about it, so I wouldn't really know all too much. But if I was to have a guess, I think Renault surely would have had to have had enough of his average performances. And then it's not so much that average performances as well, but his whole blasé attitude towards his performances, and obviously the blaming of being unlucky, which obviously doesn't help with the media. But I think his attitude obviously wouldn't have rubbed off well. Obviously, they've seen data. His team would have seen data and just gone, look, you're just not fast enough. And I think they've just gone, we've given you a decent shot. We've given you 1 3/4 years, and you've just not performed. And we've got this guy here who is, from what we've seen, could be a potential world champion, and we've signed him. And obviously, Renault they gave up a bit. Obviously, dropping engines and swapping bits around, that I think they just wanted to see how he'd go in the car as soon as they could.
And Greg, how did you read that situation?
I'm not sure where the pressure came from. I mean, for all we know is that Jolyon's standing his ground as he deserves to from the Sky people carrying on and on as they do, but I don't know. I thought he didn't deserve a chance this year based on his performance last year. Maybe Malaysia was the straw that broke the camel's back. It did look almost sort of comedic, his performance in Sepang.
Two spins unassisted.
Yeah,
and then and then having his incident with Sainz, which I think was actually Sainz's fault. So I think that was with Palmer and Sainz, wasn't it? Oh, I can't remember now.
Are you talking about the incident at turn 1?
Yes.
Sainz's fault? Is that what you're saying? I thought he just spun on his own.
No, there was one earlier than that where Sainz cut down. I thought it was on Palmer, but maybe
I thought it was Ocon.
Yeah, actually, you're right. It was Ocon. No, my mistake.
That's okay.
Well, I was due to make one. It's been a long year. All right.
Yeah, well, so's Palmer. No more mistakes for him, though.
No more mistakes. 2 questions for you then, Luce. A, do you think Carlos Sainz will have any kind of result at Austin? Do you think he'll be anywhere near Hulkenberg? And B, do you think that Jolyon Palmer will find a place on the grid next season?
To your first question, I don't know if he'll beat Hulkenberg, but
probably not.
I think
will he pressure him?
I think he'll be really close to him. I think those two, they have the potential to be like one of the best pairings on the grid. And if obviously Sainz can push Hulkenberg to be a better driver, you're going to have Hulkenberg pushing Sainz to be a better driver. That's only going to be good for Renault. So that'll be something really good to watch. As for getting a result, I think that's all car dependent and how their car will go. And obviously we saw how they went at Suzuka and it wasn't all that flash. And Coda has some similar sections, so I'm not too sure how they'll go. As for seeing Palmer on the grid next year, maybe he's a third driver somewhere, or if Sauber are really, really desperate for money, that'd be the only places I could see him landing on the grid.
Right, and what about you, Greg? Do you think that Sainz has a chance to put some pressure on Hulkenberg? Will he do a better job than Jolyon would have? And what do you think? Do you think Palmer warrants a seat on the grid next year with a Williams or even a Sauber or someone like that?
Well, with your original 2 questions, no and no. So Sainz will take some time to get used to that car, and Palmer definitely does not deserve a place on the grid next year, so I don't expect to see him on the grid next year, but you never know. It seems like Williams have probably got plenty of other options at their disposal right now. It seems that they might actually be interested in good drivers again, so we'll see how that works out for them. But so if that's their modus operandi, I don't expect to see Palmer on their shortlist, so we'll see.
They're interested in Diresta now, come on.
Yeah, but he's not got money, has he? So.
But he's British.
I know Williams. Williams I don't know. I won't say anything, but we'll see. But I think it'll take more than like one race for Sainz to be immediately on the pace. I think so. We'll see. I mean, I guess it's a different car, but the same engine, so at least there's that. But
And
he'll come up to speed though fairly quick.
how far do you think we'll get into the telecast before Sky talk about how unlucky Jolyon Palmer is to be off the grid? And I want it in minutes, please. Luce, you first.
Well, they've got to get through, how good Hamilton is and how the championship's over. That'll be about 2 minutes. And then maybe they'll gloss over Bottas and start. I reckon 3.5 minutes.
Greg, care to wager?
I'm expecting Palmer to replace Rosberg as the pundit on the weekend, so that should be really
no.
good.
Please don't. For sure.
So he can replace Nico for sure Rosberg.
For sure, Rosberg.
I don't know. I'm sure they'll mention it plenty of times. I don't watch practice, so I won't be able to see it, but I'm sure we'll hear all about it. Maybe you can be there to hashtag ask Crofty about it.
Maybe I can bail Crofty up in the car park and hashtag ask him why I can't have his job. And I'll ask him with a bat. No, I'm only kidding. All right, so now
That's not how they do it in America.
You saying I should get a gun?
I didn't say anything.
Right. Okay. All right. So there's the two big things I wanted to talk about listed here. And we are approximately 36 minutes in, so we've got a bit of time up our sleeve. The first one was looking at the championship this year and the way that the points have worked out, which is, Hamilton 306, Vettel 247. I mean, the gap's now 59 points. It's pretty insurmountable, really, unless Hamilton has some DNFs or significant failures. Bottas 234, and then you got to roll the Rolodex down to number 5 and see Kimi Raikkonen on 148. From Ferrari's perspective, have they shot themselves in the foot with their driver lineup in that their second driver does not take points away from the number one driver's championship effort? And do you think that if things are the same next year in terms of the competitiveness between the Mercedes and the Ferrari, or even the Ferrari and the Red Bull, whoever, is Ferrari's strategy of not putting two really strong drivers in the car, as we would deem it, is it gonna hurt them? Not so much from a constructor's perspective, but from the second car's ability to take points away on the weekends where their car actually warrants being a 1-2, or at least both on the podium. And I'll start with you, Greg, as the Ferrari fan, and because you can share maybe a little bit of how you've seen the season as a fan and whether you're frustrated by Ferrari's driver signings. Or I might add, or do you think it wouldn't have made a difference? It doesn't really make a difference at this point.
This year wouldn't have made a difference. There's no doubt. Hamilton's got a bigger lead right now than Rosberg had over him last year, and Hamilton won every race, to close out that year, and he still didn't do it. So I don't think, with the gap as it is right now, that Raikkonen could make a difference. And to be fair, he needs to beat Lewis Hamilton, who's no slouch. So I don't think it would have changed anything.
But on the weekends when the Ferrari car was strong, could he have done more to take points from Hamilton and Bottas?
Plus, potentially, I would talk about it in terms of constructors. I would be more frustrated than the single drive, like the drivers' championship side of things. He had his weekends though. He did have his weekends where he was strong. Monaco comes to mind.
Yep.
So he has been better this year, and I think more so than that. I think Sebastian was saying some stuff in the press just this week that he's really happy with Kimi as his teammate and whatnot. So, I mean, that not only do you need to think about your drivers in terms of how fast they are and what they can do in that sense, but if they work well together, that's got to be a plus. If they make your lead driver happy, because usually there is going to be your lead driver and your second driver, and if they make your superstar comfortable, then that is something to take into consideration, I suppose. So I think Kimi is still. I mean, I've said a lot of. I've said a lot of nasty stuff about his performances and whatnot, but he's still probably the right man for Ferrari right now.
So I'll ask you the same question, Lucy, if you remember everything that I said to Greg, and I want to add one more thing, just to follow up to what Greg was saying, in regards to Raikkonen, with Sebastian being comfortable with Kimi in the other car. What we saw at Red Bull a couple of seasons ago was them turf out Daniel Kvyat and put Verstappen in the car, a move that made Daniel Ricciardo a better driver, you would say. Increased his performances because he had a far more competitive teammate. Is Sebastian Vettel good enough that wouldn't make a difference regardless who was in the second car, or should Ferrari put a good driver in the car to be the carrot and the stick for Vettel to push himself harder as well?
Well, on the previous question, I think this year Ferrari have obviously, I reckon they've done the right decision in obviously having him in. Next year, I think honestly it has to be his last year. It has to be his last year. But as for signing a better second driver or thinking about it, it comes down to, obviously you don't want to unsettle a driver who's established. We saw in 2007 how that went down. That cost McLaren 2 championships, and there's no guarantees that it will, obviously spur Vettel on to be better. Obviously, and you don't want the personalities of each driver to sort of clash. So just say plugging, taking Raikkonen out and putting obviously someone like Fernando Alonso in the car, for example. I'm not, that might not work. You've got to have the personalities, and in the end, Formula One is a team, and if everybody's working together to be, better, whether it helps only the one driver and Vettel out, or it helps a team out in that they're not smashing into each other, it can only, be a good thing, I think. So you want them to be good, but both be good. But they've got the personalities have to work together. Like you can't have two incendiary drivers.
Can I just add, based on, I don't like to say that certain drivers don't like having strong teammates or whatnot, but I mean, history's sort of proven out just through Vettel's performances that when he's had a stronger teammate like Daniel Ricciardo, he hasn't really performed very well. I know that's just 1 year, but when you compare it to how he was with Mark Webber, when he was right on top of Mark Webber's performances, say 2011, 2013, that's when he seemed like he was at his strongest. He seemed unbeatable in those years when he was comfortably on top of his teammate. So he might just be one of those drivers that, it doesn't work like the way it has for Ricciardo with Verstappen.
So the other thing that occurs to me about that is the best argument for having a maybe a secondary driver at arm's length, is the best argument for that actually Lewis Hamilton this year?
I guess. I mean, Hamilton, yeah, for some reason Rosberg seemed to really get to him, and
like we've all pretty much agreed on here that Hamilton appears to be driving the best he ever has and putting in career best performances, and it's at a time where he's not being pressured by his teammate.
I think, but on the flip side, those last 4 races last year, by Rosberg's own admission, like Hamilton was pretty much unbeatable. He worked really hard and he put in really, really strong performances. The Rosberg couldn't do anything about it. So it's a tough one. The psychology of a racing driver is kind of complex. I don't envy the people in those teams that have to manage it, like say a Niki Lauda or something like that. So yeah, they're not easy decisions to make.
Yeah. All right, then. The other one I wanted to bring up, and we did touch on this earlier, was the tyres, and how this year, obviously, the compounds are probably a little bit harder than what is ideal, I guess, and a little bit harder than what probably Pirelli was expecting them to be. Obviously, they didn't really know what to expect going into this new era and a new tyre construction. But have we missed the randomness that we saw last year with the initial introduction of the 3 compounds for the race? The fact that most of the races have deviated back to a one-stop strategy. Have we missed that tyre, the tyre randomness loose? And do you hope that they soften up the compounds for next year to spice it up a little bit more? Or are you happy seeing the races decided on the track and not in the pits?
Well, I like it to be, you want to have some strategy involved. So I'd like to see, like, personally for me, I think obviously the tyres this year have been too hard, but obviously when in the past Pirelli have made tyres that have been a bit risky and have, failed. Obviously with these cars being so much faster throughout the corners, obviously they didn't want to take the risk and have, a driver go off at 320 kilometers an hour at Baku and end up, severely hurt. So I can understand why obviously they were harder this year, but yeah, I'd like to see next year softer tyres. But I'd also, if they're gonna persist with having harder tyres, I know a lot of people don't like it, and teams sort of a bit iffy about it. But refueling, I reckon that would be another thing to mix things up.
And Greg, how do you feel about the tire situation here? And on Luce's point about refueling.
I think getting rid of refueling was the right thing to do. But it's basically what I said about the tire strategies at Suzuka. I think we needed to see more tire strategy involved. I think that's what gives us the good races, keeps things. I don't think it should be as ridiculous as some races we've seen, where it's kind of they're just continually trying to undercut each other in 2 and 3 stop races. But yeah, I think that the tires need to degrade a little bit more. They need to be a bit softer. So hopefully that's what Pirelli do for next year.
All right. Well, I think that just about covers it. I think we're golden. So we'll do the rounds again for final thoughts, and I'll start with you, Greg. Any final thoughts for this week?
We'll see what happens. I mean, it's not an ideal time zone. First of all, you're going to end up very jet lagged. I'm not sure if I'm going to watch the race, but I'll give them my best shot.
I was hoping to text you live updates.
Yeah, like 6 in the morning, whatever it is. But yeah, no, it's the kind of the championship's lost a bit of the sting that it had before. So, I mean, we'll see how we go. There's some intrigue coming for this weekend with Sainz going to Renault and whatnot. But yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame that it kind of had to. I mean, it's not over until it's over, but it's kind of a shame that it had to end so early.
Yeah. Okay. And Luce, final thoughts from you.
Well, I just hope we get 4 rounds. I think it's 4 rounds anyway. Of just some great races. The championship is pretty much over, barring obviously some insane bad luck on Lewis Hamilton's part and some extreme fortune for Sebastian Vettel. But I'd just like to see I'd like to see a Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes, battle it out in 2 or 3 of the races, and just
That'd be good.
Some aggressive racing with no one going too far. It'd be just to have a nice finish to the year, because it has been, I think, from what we've had the last few years, it's been a much better year. So I just hope we get a good finish to it.
Very good. All right, my final thoughts are that I'm not looking forward to my 15-hour flight tomorrow, but I am looking forward to actually getting to Texas and hitting the track and seeing what COTA is like. I haven't been there before, obviously. And doing some other stuff. Going to watch Luce's favorite basketball team play. That'll be good. I'll have to send him some photos for that. And But Formula One wise, I know that Robert Kubica tested during the week for Williams. I do hope that Williams decide to sign him. It's a good news story for Formula One. So if Sir Frank, Claire, if you're listening, what you should do is you should definitely sign Robert Kubica, because
you got to do it for Webby.
You got to do it for Webby, man.
They've got to channel their inner Sheila Buff and just do it.
I thought you were going to say that Kubica wasn't going to divide them.
No.
Okay.
And they've got to make our dreams come true.
Got to make Williams great again. So that's my final thought. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. We actually did manage to keep the time tonight because we're about to hit 50 minutes. So that's what happens when Matt's not here. So that was a good effort, guys, and thanks for your contribution. We'll be back. Not next week, because I'll be still in Texas, and that will make for an awkward time zone. But back the week after to discuss what we saw at Austin, and hopefully we've still got an active championship. Although with 59-point lead and only 4 races to go, Hamilton really doesn't need to do. I almost went full Alonso there with Hamilton. He really doesn't have to do that much at this point to secure the title. And when he wins it, when he locks it in, he'll deserve it. So good on him. Whilst Sebastian's been having problems, Hamilton's been smashing it out of the park. So let's just hope, like Lou said, we get some good races. Thanks everybody who tuned in, and we'll catch you in a few weeks' time.